Hey, TJI listeners, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now YouTube.
Please like us, subscribe, and leave some comments. We want to know what you like, what you want to hear more about, where we're going.
911, what's your emergency?
There are 75 men around our building, and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Tell them there are children and women in here, and to call it off. I hear gunfire. Oh, shit.
Good evening, friends. It has been over 36 hours now since federal agents first...
February 28th, 1993. The ATF raids the Branch Davidian compound at Mount Carmel, just outside of Waco, Texas. Richard Ray was there and shares his personal and professional experiences of the siege.
Well, that was kind of a tumultuous, is that the right word, time in my life. I mean, there were some good things going on and some bad things going on. I'd separated from my wife, was living apart from her. One of the kids was living with me and the other two were living with her. And so that had been going on for about a year or so. But some good things had happened in my career too, because I had, after a long contract dispute, I had been given a big bump up and basically assigned to do the 5, 6, and 10 Monday through Friday. But I was anchoring in Fort Worth, which is kind of a story for another time. But in any event, it all started on that Sunday morning, February 28th, 1993. It was a rainy Sunday morning. I'd just taken the kids to church and dropped them off at their mother's house, and I came home and the phone was ringing, and it was the station. Of course, we didn't have cell phones, or I guess we had pagers back then, but I called the station, and they were frantic that I needed to get in immediately. Something was going on in Waco, and they were talking fast, and I didn't get all the details, but I knew something big was going on. And I also knew that we were apparently getting our butts kicked on the day one of this thing. And we'll tell this story later, but the final day of the story, the tables were turned and we were kicking butts. But that's the way it goes in the TV business. So I scrambled to get down to the station as quickly as I could. And I was told to meet a photographer named Phil Fleming, who still remains a great friend of mine. And it was a pouring rainstorm. And by the time we were on the road, I'd gotten a bit of a picture of what was going on. There'd been this raid. There'd been this horrific shootout. I'd already seen some of the video, which you and I both agree, I think is probably the most dramatic news video ever, that we've ever seen at least. And we knew there were federal agents dead. We knew there were probably people inside the compound dead. We knew it had something to do with an ATF raid. And we knew that there was a reporter and a photographer from the CBS affiliate in Dallas, or in Waco rather, Channel 25, a reporter and a photographer who were doing live shots from the scene. But instead of doing them with the CBS affiliate, which we were at the time, they were doing it with Channel 8, the ABC affiliate. Apparently the general manager or the news director or somebody there had a relationship with Belo, which owned Channel 8 then. And thus they were kicking our butt with live reports. And the young guy that was doing the reports was doing a heck of a job. But we drove through the rain, and by the time we got there, the rain had cleared and the gunfight had ended.
So it wasn't just the reporter and the photographer. There was also a live crew down there?
Yeah, by this time, everybody was scrambling. This was a national story, very quickly became a national story. Once they started seeing the video of basically ATF officers on the roof, bullets coming through the roof, hitting the ATF officers, and the federal agents scrambling off the roof, others badly wounded. This thing quickly became a big story. So you had news crews, live trucks, satellite trucks, and over the next few hours, we got there. We were probably in the first wave that got there early afternoon. But by nightfall, there had to be a line of, I would guess, 30 photographers and reporters doing live shots from the scene. And at that point, we were all about a mile away, and ATF was still in control of the scene, basically. And again, we didn't know all the details that had happened. We would find this out later. And let me get into some of that, because to get the history of this, you have to realize that ATF had gone in to do this raid. They had all these, they were, dressed for a SWAT operation, all these officers in a cattle car behind a pickup. And they rolled in and basically got outgunned. I mean, the Branch Davidians, David Koresh and his people they had 50 caliber weapons. They were just, it was awful. There were badly wounded agents, dead agents, as it turned out. And we didn't know a lot of this at first, but we could see from that video, anybody who saw that video knew that something horrendous had happened. And that turned out to be just the beginning of what turned out to be a 51-day siege.
I saw that video. I've never seen so many shots fired. Handguns, machine guns coming from both sides. There were ATF agents trying to get in through an open window, and they were pulling on this black sheet, trying to get in there. Then two of them went in there. Suddenly, bullets were flying from the outside. But what I don't know, and I saw that footage, what I don't know is why were they raiding it? What was the crime? What was the setup? Kind of take me through the why on this.
ATF agents were going in to serve warrants. They'd been building a case on David Koresh and the Branch Davidians that they were stockpiling illegal weapons, and they were, obviously. And they were going in to make this very dramatic daytime raid on a Sunday morning. And they took along their own news crew, by the way. I shouldn't say news crew, camera crew. Although we've never seen any video from that, because if they shot any, the raid went so badly, they were not going to be putting that out. There was enough bad stuff out there already. But they went in there to serve these warrants. And we found out this late. We all found this. It came out pretty quickly afterward that they'd been tipped off that the ATF agents were coming. And that gets the story of who tipped them off. It didn't come out right away. In fact, the photographer and the editor from the Waco station, John McLemore, and his photographer, Dan, whose last name escapes me right at this moment, they did get a tip on it. They were the ones there waiting, but they're not the ones who tipped off the Branch Davidians that they were coming. Yet another news photographer from Waco was trying to find the scene, because it's not in Waco. It's about 13 miles east-northeast of Waco, and it's hard to find. So he stopped a rural postal carrier to ask him where this Branch Davidian compound was. And unfortunately, that carrier happened to be part of the Branch Davidians. He was David Koresh's brother-in-law. One of David's wives was his sister. And of course, he knew if he was looking for it, others, that there was something coming. And also the ATF had an undercover agent who'd been in the cult, trying to disguise himself as a potential believer in what David Koresh was preaching. And he'd come out before the raid, went straight to the house where the ATF agents were gathering to do the raid, and told his leaders point blank, and this all came out in congressional hearings a year later, they know you're coming. You've got to call the raid off. They know you're coming. Don't go. And they went anyway.
They went anyway with, I've heard, 70 agents.
Yeah, all stuffed in the back of a long trailer that you would haul cattle in. I mean, which offered no protection at all once the shooting started, especially if you got a 50 caliber weapon shooting at you. And in the meantime, this is all going on, and it went on for a very long time. And there's a lieutenant in the sheriff's department in Waco, the McLennan County Sheriff's Department, who was on the phone trying to negotiate a ceasefire with the Branch Davidians. And, the Branch Davidians are screaming on the phone. We got these tapes later, there's women and children in here. Tell them to stop shooting. And they finally got this ceasefire agreed upon. And so I better quit shooting so they could take out their wounded and dead. Now, during this, and there's the whole video that was shot by the Waco TV crew is just remarkable. You've got the reporter crouching down the front seat of the car on his two-way radio, trying to call for help. The ATF was so unprepared. They just had not made any preparations for this to go wrong at all. They expected apparently just to waltz in there and arrest the guy, arrest Koresh and anybody else they wanted to arrest, get their video of that arrest, and ride off into the sunset as victors. Instead, it went just terribly wrong. Now, again, the reporter and the photographer, they're both of them are under fire as much as the police officers are. And at one point, they finally get the ceasefire done. They use their news car to help ferry out the wounded and the dying. You had agents in the back of this little SUV. You had agents lying on the hood of the thing. And as they're going out, again, the photographer's just doing his job, trying to take video of what's going on. And a couple of ATF agents, and it's all caught on camera, a couple of ATF agents who hadn't been wounded proceed to knock him down and beat him up. It was just the ugliest of set of events that you can imagine. And we didn't find out a lot about some of this until much, much later. But the thing went just so horribly wrong so fast.
This is all day one intensity. So let me back up a second. If you're going to raid a place that, because they have a bunch of illegal weapons, your expectation should be that they might fire back. The second thing, do you know what time of day the raid was? Because normally they go in darkness in the middle of the night.
Now it was like 9 o'clock in the morning. It was morning time. And they really didn't expect, I don't know how they could not have expected there to be some pushback, except that they thought they were going to surprise them, that they had the element of surprise. But then again, as I just told you, this Rodriguez, undercover agent, had come out and told them, they know you're coming, don't go. There was no element of surprise whatsoever. And they knew this. The congressional hearings on this a year later were just astounding at the decision-making process of this. They were so bent on going in there and making this big splashy raid that even when it became obvious that there was no element of surprise, that they were likely to shoot back, they went anyway.
9 a.m. So I've watched enough police shows. They always go in like 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock, because the theory is that the people inside are still sleeping, they're groggy, they're not quite awake, they don't have clothes on. 9 a.m., they've already had 2 cups of coffee and they're ready. They probably had lookouts too. Did you ever hear anything like that?
Yeah, they had lots of lookouts, and this compound, there's nothing surrounding it. It was a poorly built, flimsy building kind of compound on a flat part of ground out there east of Waco, where you could see for miles. So there was no getting around it. When that pickup and the cattle trailer started coming up the long driveway, they had plenty of notice. So it went bad real quick. And I just still can't get over the fact that they knew they'd lost the element of surprise, and they went anyway. And not only that, they had not made any preparations to have ambulances standing by or anything. The shootout went for so long that by the time they finally called a ceasefire, we know now that at least 4 agents were killed and 6 Branch Davidians were killed in the initial raid. And by the time, again, I got there, it was early afternoon. We're all about a mile away. ATF is still in control of the scene. I want to talk more about this 2 episodes from now when I talk about the untold stories. But a lot of why the ATF was doing this was because they were trying to raise their profile. They thought that they were getting short-circuited in fundraising and public attention, that they were always overshadowed by the FBI. And remarkably, it's about 8 o'clock at night. And of course, we're doing live shots. We've been doing live shots since the time we got there. In fact, we would do live shots almost around the clock for weeks. And all of a sudden, the ATF is in control, and the FBI rolls in and promptly announces that, okay, ATF, you're out of here. We're taking over. Just rub their noses in the mess that had been made. And they also did. A second thing was to push everybody, all the satellite trucks, all the reporters, all the photographers, had to move another mile back. So now we're 2 miles away from the compound. You could still see it, but it was quite a distance. You really needed a long camera. And I remember doing a live shot from inside one of the satellite trucks, because we'd been informed that they had 50 caliber weapons and that bullets could fly that far, and maybe we shouldn't be standing outside doing them. And so we had to break down everything, move it back another mile, and set up again. And that's where they set up what everybody calls Satellite City. There was a little corner lot with a pony in it, one little horse called Skippy, as I remember. And somebody pretty quickly brokered a deal with whoever owned that, the farmer that owned that, and everybody pooled some money together, I'm guessing, and sort of rented that little lot for the duration. And so again, you had multiple satellite trucks, multiple live shot vans, and dozens of photographers and reporters. And that's where we were parked for most of 51 days.
Let me put a wrapper on day one. It started at 9. When did the ceasefire begin?
The ceasefire was, I think, maybe an hour and a half into it, at least an hour into it. It went on for a long time. By the time I got there, the ceasefire had been underway. The skies had cleared. It wasn't raining anymore. And the ceasefire was holding. And they got the wounded and the dead out. And then the siege set in. And again, that siege just went on forever and ever. But the initial thought, Bryan, was, and you were involved in the newsroom back in Dallas, the initial thought was we had to stay there because something could happen at any minute. Either the Branch Davidians would surrender and come out, because there were children in there and women in there. They didn't know how many women and children. They knew there were a lot in there. And something could happen. Somebody would come out. And that did start to trickle out. I don't know that there were a lot that came out the first day, probably not the first day, but within a couple of days, 1 or 2 people would leave. They'd send out 2 or 3 children. But it went on like that, where every time somebody came out of that compound, whether it was a child or somebody that was an adult with the Branch Davidians, that was a huge story. You had to be there with a camera on. In fact, it was very quickly that they got and we weren't the only ones, got a RV, a camper down there. And for the first, I'd say at least a week, if not 10 days or 2 weeks, we had somebody around the clock in that camper watching through the night. They had night scope cameras. Mostly you're just watching, cows walking around in the field in front of you and coyotes chasing them and that kind of thing. But again, the anticipation was everybody was on edge. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. And it didn't. And it didn't. And then it got into a different routine.
So after the shooting stopped, ceasefire, then you arrive on the scene. So the rest of the day was kind of assessing everything, cleaning up, taking care of the wounded and the deceased. Then what? What do you do on day 2? You've said in the siege, I would think somebody had a sense of how much food they had. That's why you would think they would be coming out soon. How much food do they have? A week's worth, 2 weeks worth? So what did you do from day 2 on? How did you get stories?
Well, the first day, of course, there was a lot of people that you wanted to interview that you could interview. The first 2, you wanted to interview the photographer and reporter, John McLemore and Dan, and I'll come up with his name in a minute. But so we talked to them because this video was so incredible, and they're telling the story of the shootout. So that's getting this. We're able to that's an incredible story right there. Run that video and have them walk you through what they saw and what they heard. And so, and then there were briefings from time to time. You would have somebody from first the ATF and then FBI come out and assess the situation, what they knew, how many they knew were dead, how many agents had died, how many had been wounded, that kind of thing. So there was sort of a frenzy of, kind of pull that whole story together. And then as the days went on, this story really had legs because it was such a bizarre history to the whole Branch Davidians and the David Koresh story. So some of these stories, you kind of run out of things to talk about, but not this one, at least not for the first 2 or 3 weeks. There was always something new coming out about how this Branch Davidian cult was formed. It actually goes back, it went back decades. It's sort of an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists. And there had been power struggles at the compound before. David Koresh, whose name was Vernon Howell actually grew up in Garland. He came on as a young guy, just one of the cult members, but over the years, he took over, changed his name, got in a power struggle with the son of the woman who was running it at the time. Her husband had been the minister that moved them all out there. And the bizarre backstory on this thing, the power struggle between David Koresh and this woman's son, it involved in a shootout. There was a big trial. People were wounded in that. They were trying to prove that they were the one. The son had actually dug up a woman and claimed that he was going to resurrect her. And when it all cleared, David Koresh had complete control of the Branch Davidians, and basically to the point that husbands couldn't sleep with their wives. Only David could sleep with their wives. He was sleeping with 12-year-old children, having babies with babies, basically. And that was another element of what came out. It wasn't just the illegal weapons. There'd been a lot of reports to Child Protective Services and that about what was going on with the children in this compound. So that led to one other thing that really gave the story a breadth and a depth was there'd been an Australian documentary maker who had come to the compound in the previous year or two and had done an extensive documentary on the Branch Davidians, because some of them were from Australia. These were educated people. There were lawyers and others with some educated. There were stupid people. I don't know. You can shake your head about how they could be suckered into believing David Koresh. But then when you watch this documentary and you saw the charismatic preacher that he was, and walking through what they believed and how they believed he was the one with the answers, which is classic cult stuff. Only the leader has the answers. The leader decides who you can have a relationship with. The leader tells you to break off all ties with your family. The leader says, give me all your money. And they did. So that kind of led to a reporting that I think gave people a pretty good idea of who these Branch Davidians were. What we didn't see then, but I did see later, especially when I took a real deep dive, I did a documentary on the 10th anniversary. They were sending a video camera in after the shootout, and David Koresh was getting on the camera. He's leaned up against the wall. He had a bad gunshot wound to his abdomen, and he's sitting there with one of his young brides and his child, and he's saying things like, they could have arrested me. I came to town all the time. They could have arrested me anywhere. They didn't have to come out here and shoot up this place and that sort of thing, which, kind of rang as true, because they had said, well, they wanted to make sure they could get him, and he never came to town. Well, the fact of the matter is, it came out later, he would go to gun shows, and he had classic cars, and he went to town quite often. I think the sheriff's department even confirmed that, yeah, they talked to him, they had relationships with him, but they would do this thing where they would trade milk, for example, for the kids, and bring the camera in, give them milk, and then he would let a couple of people go out. So there was this kind of thing going back and forth for some time. Let me get back to what's going on in my life, because I've been in a protracted contract dispute after I was involved in it wasn't just me, it was the union, AFTRA, had sued the station because we talked about this, I think, in episode 1. And it became a landmark decision where they couldn't give us comp time. They had to give us overtime. They had to actually pay us overtime. So then they decided they were going to offer contracts, but they offered me a lowball on my contract. I said, no, I'll just keep taking my overtime because I'll make more money doing that. Well, just before this, they finally reached an agreement in which I was going to be the tri-anchor. There were going to be 3 anchors. It was John and Clarice in Dallas, and then I would be anchoring from the Fort Worth Bureau. And so that was kind of clunky anyway. The producers didn't like it. I knew it wasn't going to last very long. But one thing they were using me more as was a field anchor, where if there was a big story going on, especially if it was a story that required more than one reporter, they would send me down to be the field anchor. And I would maybe read some short stories, pitch my own package, pitch to another package by another reporter, and then maybe have a Q&A at the end and come back later in the show, that sort of thing. So this Waco situation was perfect for a field anchor. So that's why I didn't spend the whole 51 days there, but man, I spent most of the weekdays over that 51-day period.
I'm concerned about the children that were there and the stories you were doing. Hostages, were they releasing some every day? How did you handle that story?
Yes, they were releasing people early on. I would say, there'd be 2 or 3 would come out one day, and then it might be a couple of days later, and they'd send out a couple of kids. And it was just a smattering of releases here. Again, the negotiations by that time have been taken over by FBI, and they were using milk and, send in a camera. I want to tell the story from in here. They were using that as tools. Okay, we'll do this if you'll release a couple more of the kids. So that kind of thing was going on. And the intensity of that, again, was just incredible, because anytime somebody came out, that was just a huge story that would lead the next newscast, which put me in a bad position too, because I'll give you one example. Early on, we had a satellite truck, and on top of the satellite truck, there was a CBS photographer with a long lens camera. And it was his job to basically make sure that anybody that came in or out of the compound, he caught that action on tape. Well, apparently he left to take a cigarette break or go to the bathroom or something when one of these releases happened. And suddenly I'm getting a call from Dallas, and the news director, who we've been calling MS, is screaming at me as if it was somehow my fault that we had missed this and everybody else had it, but we didn't. Well, I had no control over the CBS photographer. And but that's kind of the way it was, which led to an interesting story that I think we both have a piece of. There was a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on back in Dallas, because there was such pressure to make sure we didn't miss anything that happened, and you never knew anything was going to happen. And at one point, apparently, one of the managers, an assistant news director, who we will call KD, who's a good guy. I like KD. He decides that, well, I'm going to go down and show those guys how to do it. I'm going to whip them into shape. And so he came down there, and Bryan, in 2 days later, after being put through the kind of ringer that we'd been put through, he looked like a zombie. And I think you can pick up the story from there.
Well, let me talk about news coverage. Put through the ringer. They're not happy with what you're doing. How do you get your stories down there? Because every day they expect some content from you. But at some point, it's just sheer boredom. I'm going to report that nothing happened. So he went down to help you get stories, or what was the problem?
I don't think it was a matter of getting stories, because, again, the first few days, there was just such a frenzy of getting caught up with, because new information was coming out every day. Every couple hours, we'd hear something new about why they went in, what happened, what went wrong with the raid. And then after that, you start to get the stories like the documentary from the Australian crew that took you right inside the Branch Davidian cult, and you could see him preaching and what he was teaching and that kind of stuff. There would come a time, and there was, with any big story, where there was some news fatigue, where they're kind of getting tired of the story back there in Dallas, but you're still doing something every day. I don't remember having a lot of trouble coming up with stuff, because between the people who were coming out, the reports that were coming out about the children, Koresh impregnating young children, all those sorts of things would spark stuff with CPS. ATF and FBI were holding news conferences in Waco, and we always had to have crews there. And anytime they had so we'd get a breakout at the scene when they had a news conference in Waco, because then the live coverage would switch there. So at least for the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, there was plenty to cover.
You had more people from Channel 4. Describe the crew, technical and on camera.
You've got a satellite truck, and you've got an engineer who runs that satellite truck. We always had at least 2 reporters and 2 photographers, usually more than that. You would have editors. Bryan was chief editor at that time, and I think you sent. I remember at least one of your editors came down there for a while, and it's 13 miles northeast of Waco. So you'd work a long shift, We were staying at a cheap hotel on the river in Waco. The station had blocked out 2 or 3 rooms, and people would come and go. You usually had to have a roommate and that kind of thing, because anytime there's a big story like this in a fairly small city like Waco, every hotel room in the city is booked. So you better get 2 or 3 and you better hold on to them. So there were people that were coming and going, changing out engineers every week. But there was usually, just as you could assume, there was going to be at least 8 or 10 people down there at any time.
So the management guy, KD, went down there to help you get your coverage under control. I was at the station, and I remember after he got a taste of what was going on there and the chaos and living conditions and all that, he called back into an editorial meeting, and he was not a happy camper and sort of read them the riot act about assuming that all the folks that you sent down there are just picking their nose or something. They're not really doing their job. And you guys were doing your job. How many hours a day did you report, and did it lead each newscast?
Well, for long periods of time, they would break into live coverage. Of course, that first night, it was wall-to-wall live shots. I think by the next day, you were probably doing, they'd break in for a live shot at 10 o'clock in the morning when they had a news conference. You'd be back on live at noon. If there's something happening, they would break into programming. That would occur, less and less, but somebody had to cover the morning news, which started at 6 a.m., and somebody had to be there for the 10 o'clock news. So that's, again, you're going to have at least 2 and probably 3 or 4 crews down there to cover all those newscasts. And it was very intense all the time, because everybody's trying to beat the other guys to make sure you're not missing anything on the story. I'll tell you a story about that was, I think, very revealing. It's like 2 or 3 nights in, and the number of people that had come out had gone to a real trickle. And they'd sent a bus in, like a school bus in, and everybody anticipated, okay, well, they're going to send out a bunch of kids, right? And so this is like 7 o'clock at night, dark, at least 7:30 maybe. And a bus comes out, and I'm standing right there, and I think George Villarreal was with me. And we watched the bus come out, and there was nobody on it. Nobody, just the driver. There were no kids on it. Well, Mike is a reporter at KRLD, as I recall, had a breathless little break into a news report that some more kids have been coming out. And then suddenly the other guys, 5 and 8 and whoever else was broadcasting, they've got this promo on the air. More children released at the Branch Davidian compound. Suddenly, MS is on the phone to me, screaming at me why we didn't have this. And I said, Mike, there was nobody on that bus. The pressure on me to report that there were children on that bus was incredible. And I finally said, I'm not gonna lie, there was nobody on that bus. But that's the kind of intense pressure that was being put on us. Just because the other guys were reporting something that wasn't true, they expected me to do the same. Now, the other guys, I think they just went off the radio reporter, and he made whatever honest mistake he made, but I wasn't going to do it. So that was another reason I think that may have led them to send KD down there to whip us into shape. And I had, I was tempted to take some satisfaction into the fact that, he got down there and got a taste of what it was really like to be on that end of it, and nobody was sitting around picking their nose. We were all scrambling nonstop for, 12, 14 hours a day. But on the other hand, I liked him, and he was a good guy, and he had never been on that end of it. And once he got a taste of it, he didn't like it very much.
It is not glamorous and not as it appears. The news business is highly competitive. You just described that. You're trying to get information that nobody else has. You're trying to be first. I'm thinking it's the original FOMO, fear of missing out, that guides everything and maybe clouds some news judgment or trying to back up what you see. How much of that was going on with your crew? If you hear something, were you able to send somebody else to confirm it or deny it, or or whatever?
Well, you certainly would try to, and that what you really hit it on the nose there. It was this fear that we were going to miss something that the other guys were going to have, and we were going to miss it. Because again, to start the raid, everybody got their butt kicked because the CBS crew from Waco decided to call the ABC affiliate in Dallas instead of the CBS affiliate in Dallas, and we eventually got them on. But by that time, they had a 2-hour jump on the story, and everybody else is scrambling to keep up. And again, stick around for a couple episodes from now, and I'll tell you how we ended up being on the other end of that and kicking everybody else's butt at the end. I'm sure their crews are getting hollered at it because Channel 4's got that. How come you guys don't have that? And that was full circle.
So it's going on now, 48 days. Something like that.
Yeah, and keep in mind that there would be a sort of a buildup, that they would look like David Koresh was finally going to let somebody out, and there's all these negotiations going on, and Koresh would promise to do this and promise to do that. At one point, he said, if you give me, I don't know how much time he asked for, but he got like 2 hours on the radio, KRLD radio, 50,000 watt channel, coast to coast radio, basically let him ramble on for 2 hours with all this Revelation Bible stuff. And the anticipation was once they let him do that, everybody'd come out peacefully and all those kids would be safe. And he broke his promise, and he broke his promise over and over and over again. In fact, I made some notes here as I go through my stuff earlier. The last time that anybody heard from David Koresh at all was April 14th. Okay. And he made a statement through his defense attorney, a lawyer named Dick DeGuerin, which was probably the most famous defense attorney in the state at that time. And he claimed that he was writing an interpretation of the 7 seals in the book of Revelation. And that when he had finished writing his interpretation of that, then everybody'd come out. They waved the white flag and all the kids and everybody would come out. Nobody believed him. By this time, he'd broken his promises so many times. News fatigue had set in. It wasn't the lead story anymore. It was like, we're still down there in case something happens, but all sorts of other news are pushing it out. And Friday, April 16th, which would have been day 48, everybody left Satellite City. I mean, everybody, all the news vans, all the photographers, all the reporters, all the satellite trucks, they all left. We were all convinced this thing was going to go on forever. And we went home.
Well, that's kind of odd that everybody would reach the same conclusion. Was there stations talking to each other, kind of saying, we're going to leave. If you leave, I'm going to leave, or I'll leave first and you leave. But if you don't leave, I'll stay because fear of missing out. How did you find out Friday is going to be it, and then you guys pack up and come home?
I think it was a last-minute decision. It was basically, everybody had kind of decided the same thing. What are you going to do? Keep telling the same story over and over again that this guy's broken his promises and nobody's coming out? Because the FBI was going through incredible efforts to make them come out. All through the night, they had huge speakers just blaring the most obnoxious music you can imagine, so the people inside couldn't sleep. Koresh had his classic cars out there, a Camaro, I think, and they'd run over his car with a tank and flatten it. They were doing everything they could to drive those people out, and they weren't coming out. At some point, I don't know if they made up their minds independently, but at some point, this thing is, and again, this is cost, the news director's got a budget, right? This thing had blown the budget for about 3 years. Having all those people down there, all the hotel, you're paying photographers overtime. You've got, per diem for their meals. This is a huge expense for a news operation. And it just got to the point where it wasn't paying off anymore, and everybody went home.
How were you told? Who did you get a call from, and what did they say? We're
going to save the exact thing for next episode. But basically, it was a Sunday afternoon. I was fishing on the lake with my son, and I got a text. Not a text, a page. I got a page. We didn't have didn't have cell phones back then. I got a page to call the news director. And when he did, he reported that I had to grab my photographer and go down to Waco, that I had to be there 4 a.m. the next morning. And I said, you're crazy. Nothing's going to happen tomorrow. But I did as I was told. And as a result, on that Monday, 51 days in, there were 3 photographers and 2 reporters out there reporting live when the FBI tanks started knocking holes in the wall and inserting tear gas. And I was one of them.
That is crazy. So you went back down. We're going to find that out in the next episode. This has been fascinating. I appreciate it. That's it for now. So I will just end this by saying peace and love, everyone.
Come back and see us again.
TJI opinions, stories, and fuzzy recollections from award-winning anchor reporter Richard Ray and host Bryan Lochhead are meant to entertain, inform, and educate. The podcast discusses significant news stories and takes you behind the scenes of TV news coverage. This now ends our podcast day.